Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here for CBSDFW.com. A stream of comments made by Governor Greg Abbott recently. He held a border security conference in Weslaco, a roundtable discussion with border experts and even his newly appointed border czar to talk a little bit about the operations down there in the border and future enforcement efforts. Let's go ahead and have a listen to what Governor Abbott had to say.
4 very simple policies that led to that dramatic decrease in illegal border crossings. One is to end catch and release. Another is to implement Title 42. Another is to implement the Remain in Mexico policy. And the other is to build a border wall. And maybe you could add to that an attitude that if you want to come to the United States of America, come here legally, not illegally. And as soon as President Biden took office, he eliminated all of those policies that President Trump put in place, and also issued basically an open invitation to anybody in the world that they can come here to the United States and cross our border illegally with no consequences. And the result was extraordinarily predictable. And that is, this past year, we saw the highest number of illegal immigrants ever who were apprehended coming across our border. Well, Texas is stepping up. And we have done more than any state has ever done. And there's a reason for it. Texans, as well as our fellow Americans, they are furious about the lawlessness caused by President Biden's open border policies. And they should be angry about that. And it's because of that that I declared border security to be an emergency item this session for us to not only address, but to address quickly because of the need for us to be even more proactive to deal with the border. There are several reasons why we need to be more proactive. The upcoming elimination of Title 42 is going to be bringing even more people across our border. It is expected to expire in May. According to federal estimates themselves, they said that once Title 42 is eliminated, we can expect up to 18,000 people crossing the border a day. Calculate that, and that would be more than 6 million people crossing the border a year because of the elimination of this one last bar to people coming across the border. The magnet will just continue to increase. And we're seeing that occur as we speak. In January, the numbers are always low about the number of people coming across the border. We've already seen upticks in what has happened from January to February. And we have information about people who are in Central America right now making their way toward the border. And we are working on strategies to make sure that Texas is going to be prepared. To the extent that any of this information gets beyond our borders, we're sending a message today. And that is, if you're coming toward the United States of America and you are thinking about crossing our border and you're thinking about making your border crossing in the state of Texas, you're picking the wrong state to enter into or to try to enter into, because we're going to do everything we can to keep you out of our border, to keep you out of our country. But I want to give you an example of how the increase has occurred in just the time period since right before Biden took office till today. In February of 2020, in the 1 week, February the 12th of 2020, in the entire border, there were 3,985 people apprehended. Is that entire border? The Texas border. 3,000, so under 4,000 people apprehended coming across the Texas border in February of 20, which was the last February that President Trump was in office. The first February that Biden was in office, it went from 3,985 to 13,672 in just 1 week in February, that very same week. And then the year after that, that very same week, it jumped to 21,000 560. And so it went up about fivefold, 5 times in just that 1 week period, year after year after year, because of Biden's open border policies. Well, what Texas has done is we have deployed the Texas National Guard far more than any state ever in the history of the United States of America to repel and to turn back people who are trying to cross the border illegally. We have deployed the Texas Department of Public Safety, and they have arrested more than 25,000 criminals who got past the Border Patrol. Had DPS not been on the border making these arrests, there would have been dangerous criminals who got away into the United States or into the state of Texas that would have posed a very serious danger to our populace. And so we thank DPS for doing that. In addition to that, altogether, they have apprehended more than 330,000 gotaways who got away from the Border Patrol or otherwise got through the gaps. And so once again, had DPS and the National Guard not been there, that would have been hundreds of thousands of more people who were able to get into the country illegally. But most prolifically is what DPS has done with fentanyl, because DPS alone has seized enough fentanyl to kill every man, woman, and child in the entire United States of America. Had DPS not seized that fentanyl that got past Border Patrol, there's no telling how many Americans would have died because of that fentanyl spread across the streets of our country. Also, to accelerate the crackdown on the Mexican drug cartels, the real cause of all of this, I declared them as terrorist organizations to empower Texas law enforcement to use advanced strategies to go after not just the cartels, but all of their assets that are here in the state of Texas, so we can do everything possible to put these Mexican drug cartels out of business. And then to help relieve small border towns, Del Rio and places like that, that have no capability to house and take care of the thousands of migrants who are dropped in their communities by Border Patrol. That led to the busing operation to relieve the congestion in these small communities where we are busing the migrants that were dropped off by Border Patrol to self-identified sanctuary cities in other parts of the United States. It is kind of interesting that one of the locations where we were dropping them off to, New York, condemned Texas for busing them to New York, only to learn that New York is now busing them to Canada. And then on top of all that, Texas is the only state in the history of the United States of America that it has ever built its own border wall. We have been in the process over the past year of acquiring rights on land owned by private landowners that will allow us to accelerate the process of building the border wall over this coming year. There's a possibility, depending upon how the construction process works, where by the end of this calendar year, Texas as a state may have added more border wall than the Trump administration did for the United States of America during his 4 years in office. Bottom line is that the Texas National Guard and DPS troopers, they are working around the clock under the leadership of Major General Seltzer and Colonel McCraw. And now also, Texas has done something no state has ever done. I announced last month that we have our own border czar, the man to my left, Mike Banks. He served in the Border Patrol in leadership positions for about 23 years, and he brings a high level of expertise. It's important to emphasize that on his first day in office, he spent more time on the border as the Texas border czar than Kamala Harris, the federal border czar, has spent in years in office. Not just that, but he operates right here out of Weslaco. And he's up and down the border every single day, working and collaborating not just with DPS and the National Guard, but working with local officials, whether they be mayors or county commissioners or sheriffs. And so Texas as a state is now operating more in sync with local communities better than we ever have because of the role of coordinator that Mike Banks, the Texas Board Czar, is playing. And very importantly, listen, this is an issue for the state of Texas to deal with. And we have to deal with it only because the federal government is not doing its job. And now that we're in session, we have the leadership of the state legislature that are fully engaged. And with us include Senator Birdwell and Representative Guillen. And I appreciate what they've done before. They've already issued analyses and reports even long before today about what's going on the border. But we will be working in collaboration with them over the course of the remainder of the session on this emergency item to make sure that Texas is doing everything we possibly can to secure the border. And so I look forward to working with them to make sure that we have the funds needed to secure the border, to protect Texans from the lawlessness created by Biden's open border policies, and to make sure that we continue to build more border wall.
Well, we've been listening to the comments made during that roundtable discussion led by Governor Abbott down in South Texas, Weslaco, with other border experts. Wanted to bring into the conversation now local immigration attorney Carlos Whetten, based here in Fort Worth from the Jaime Barron law firm, somebody who specializes, of course, in immigration law. You're very well versed, Carlos, with everything that's going down in the border. First and foremost, let's talk a little bit about sort of the volume of cases that they talked about fentanyl and dangerous sort of situations coming across the border. For you all here, it's a little different because you deal with asylum seekers, and we didn't hear them talk too much about the asylum seekers. Mostly we heard about the threats of fentanyl and other dangers that are coming across the border. What did you make of all of that?
Well, like you said, there was a huge emphasis on criminal activity, people who are coming here for nefarious reasons. But like I was talking to you before, it wasn't until the very end that they start mentioning some asylum seekers. And what we see is that the vast majority of people that are trying or attempting to cross the border right now are seeking asylum, and they are eligible legally to ask for asylum in the country. So
that creates a pretty big problem, especially on your end, because we know that the courts are backlogged. We know that these folks, depending on what countries they come from, they have that right to seek asylum. What is the problem here, you think, when we talk about border enforcement, when we talk about how challenging it is down there? And I think both sides agree that it is a challenge, that Border Patrol and officials down there are sort of overrun with this. But when you don't address actual policy when it comes to immigration, and address routes in which those folks who are seeking asylum can enter the country, what kind of problems does that create, you think?
Well, the people attempting to cross the country have a legitimate reason to do so. A lot of them are fleeing extreme violence in their home countries. They're fleeing difficult economic situations. A lot of them have been extorted by criminal gangs. And so there's a legitimate reason for them to be coming here and requesting asylum. But if we don't have enough staff and enough bureaucracy to handle that caseload so that they can adequately process those asylum claims, then you're going to have people waiting for years before they can actually have their story heard and actually request asylum.
The governor, for the past couple of years, especially through Operation Lone Star, has been very sort of forward about efforts to protect the border. We know we've talked about things like ordering DPS troopers to park side by side in Del Rio and create a sort of a metal barrier using their cars. We heard him today, or in this news conference rather, talking about 10 years he wants to see as a punishment for anybody caught smuggling guns or people. But this is all sort of enforcement at the border, sort of, you know, I can see the optics, I can see the picture opportunities for a governor who's talking tough on the border, but what else needs to be done policy-wise, you think, to sort of achieve, you know, some sort of control of the border?
Well, there needs to be significant immigration reform. There needs to be an opportunity for these people that are requesting asylum to have their case heard quickly and adjudicated quickly before an immigration judge who is a qualified person to adjudicate these asylum claims. In my personal opinion, there also needs to be a way to open up possibly some kind of a guest worker program or some other type of legal status, not a permanent status, but some way for people to be able to work, earn money, and to send money back home to their families. I think as long as there's going to be an economic need people are going to keep coming.
Is that something that you wish you would have heard more of coming out of the governor and these border? And again, we're not trying to downplay sort of the dangers associated with fentanyl and some of the gun running and some of the cartel operations. We know that's happening. But by and large, you're saying what's happening a lot more are these asylum seekers that are backlogging the system.
Of course. I mean, definitely do not want to downplay the situation at the border. But there needs to be significant immigration reform. Now, of course, that is the responsibility of the federal government and the responsibility of Congress.
Absent of that, you see this sort of issue continuing this way?
I do. Without any significant reform, I think it's only going to get worse. There's only going to be more and more people coming seeking a better life here.
Talk to me a little bit about some of the cases that, obviously we're talking about the border right now, but so much of this ends up in courts here throughout North Texas, DFW. What do your clients tell you? Where are they coming from mostly? And how backlogged are their cases? Because you were saying in many cases, they're not going to get a chance to go before a judge for at least 2 years?
Yeah, sometimes more. So the immigration court here in the Dallas area is very backlogged. We're looking at possibly a wait time of 2 to 3 years before they get before an immigration judge. And in that time, they are here in this country waiting for their chance without the ability to work, most of them. And so often they won't see somebody for years and years to come.
And of course, these folks then, go about living their lives here, right? I mean, many of them, they get married, maybe they get employment somehow, even have their own families. I mean, all of those things happen during that time when they're waiting to see a judge, making that process that much more difficult, right?
Exactly. They build lives here.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they have family, friends, someone else that they're living with here. And so they end up building a life here. Their children end up being enrolled in school, learning English, and it just gets that much harder for them to go back to their home country once they do finally see an immigration judge.
We heard them speak a little bit also about, the efforts to continue to build a border wall or a border fence, a border barrier, whatever word you want to call or use to describe that. How effective do you think that will be in keeping the asylum seekers? And I know, again, we're specifically talking about asylum seekers now. How effective is all of that in keeping asylum seekers from wanting to enter the U.S. Legally or illegally in this case?
Well, most of the time from what I've seen with my clients is that they're not crossing in between the border checkpoints. They want to present themselves to an immigration officer. They want to find Border Patrol so they can officially request asylum. So I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference specifically for the asylum seekers, because they're still going to try and come and try to do it the legal way, which is the only option that they have, which is to request asylum.
And I want to reemphasize something here, because I know that we talk about things, even anecdotally, these cases are at an all-time high. We haven't seen, but in fact, these cases are at an all-time high, and it's not slowing down.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And we're seeing people coming from everywhere, not just Central America, not just Mexico. We're seeing many more South Americans, people from the Caribbean, oftentimes people from outside of the Americas as well, trying to enter that way.
They did speak about migrants that have recently been caught at the border trying to enter illegally from China. Is that of any concern to you?
You know, I haven't come across any of my clients that have mentioned any of that. My concern is that if they're requesting asylum, that they be given an opportunity to do so.
Right. And right now, what does that process look like currently?
Well,
I know it's very lengthy, I know it's complicated, but normally they present themselves to the border, usually surrender to border authorities, and that sort of begins their asylum claim, right? What typically happens after that procedurally? How does that look?
So they're given an initial interview, which is called the credible fear interview with a border official, which makes an initial assessment as to whether or not they meet the criteria to ask for asylum.
Okay.
Then once they do that, they have a year to submit an asylum application to the Immigration Service. And then it'll be adjudicated before an immigration judge. The immigration judge, probably 3 years in the future, will take a look at that asylum application, look at evidence, take the testimony of whoever is applying for asylum, and make a decision of whether or not they meet the high standard for asylum.
Right, okay. Clearly a very complex topic. Yes. Right now, this is just one piece of it that we're chatting about on the heels of this news conference that was held down in the border with Governor Abbott and other border officials. Attorney Carlos Whetten, thank you so much for joining us, for offering some insight. We will certainly chat with you, I'm sure, in the future on similar type issues. But for now, thanks for taking some time to watch the news conference with us and sort of debrief some of the things that were talked about. So we appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for tuning in to this stream here on CBSDFW.com. I'm Ken Molestina. Thanks for watching.